finding strange pills in your husband's suit pocket, secretly swapping them with livestock medication. In the dead of night, your sister-in-law's blood-curdling scream shattering the silence, your husband roaring like a rabid animal, and your mother-in-law fainting at the grotesque sight of it all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Twilight Echoes channel. How would you react if you discovered that the husband who once swore eternal love to you was hiding a vial of demonic capsules in his breast pocket? Especially when his back had been turned to you in bed for months. Would you have the audacity to gamble your entire life on one insane, desperate bet? To turn those pills of sin into a weapon of mass destruction, so that in the dead of night, agonizing screams and beastly roars would tear off every pristine mask, stripping bare a truth more repulsive than hell itself. Tonight, I have placed my bet, and I do not know what awaits me, total victory or eternal oblivion. My name is Alara. I am 30 years old, and for 6 years, I have been the daughter-in-law of the wealthy Prescott family. 6 years is more than enough time to morph a naive girl from rural upstate New York who believed in fairy tale romances into a silent, ghostly shadow haunting her own home. From the outside, everyone said I had hit the jackpot. I was lucky to marry Callum, a fiercely successful VP of sales with bespoke suits and silver-tongued charm. Lucky to live in a sprawling, 3-story colonial estate in Winnetka, an elite suburb of Chicago, without ever having to glance at a price tag. But they didn't know the soul-crushing toll I paid for this so-called luck. The price was profound humiliation and suffocating isolation. Aside from my treacherous husband and my cynical, elitist mother-in-law, Eleanor, a retired private school headmistress, my new household also included Callum's younger brother, Declan, and his wife, Serena. Declan was a genuinely good, honest man. However, his job as a civil engineer managing state highway infrastructures meant he was constantly traveling or working brutal overnight graveyard shifts. His absence created a lethal void, a golden opportunity for his wife, Serena, and his older brother, Callum, to sow the seeds of their cardinal sin. Serena, my sister-in-law, was undeniably stunning, but her beauty was inextricably linked to her vain, flirtatious, and brazen nature. She constantly looked down on me, treating me like a clueless country bumpkin, and shamelessly flaunted her assets to seduce my own husband. But the guiltiest of them all was Callum. Over the last 6 months, he had completely transformed. From a loving, attentive partner, he had mutated into a cold, irritable tyrant. Our physical marriage had evaporated. He moved his belongings into the home office at the far end of the hallway, citing the need for absolute silence to focus on a massive corporate merger. I believed him. I gritted my teeth and practiced patience, convincing myself that my husband was doing this for his career. I continued to serve him, bringing him his espresso and catered meals, treating him like a king. Meanwhile, as I withered away in my solitude, Serena practically glowed brighter each passing day. She ruthlessly blew through cash, flaunting designer bags and luxury athleisure wear that were mathematically impossible to afford on Declan's engineer salary. Their sickeningly close dynamic became glaringly obvious. Accidental grazes, lingering, loaded stares, hushed whispers in the kitchen at midnight when Declan was managing a construction site. Every little moment felt like a syringe of venom straight to my heart. Suspicion morphed into a monstrous parasite feeding on my sanity, turning me into an insomniac riddled with paranoia. And this afternoon, that monster was finally fed a sickening feast of naked truth. Callum had rushed home from a client luncheon, hastily showered, and locked himself back in his home office, carelessly tossing his tailored suit jacket over a dining chair. As usual, I picked it up to prep it for the dry cleaners. I slipped my hand into the inner breast pocket, and my heart flatlined. I pulled out a sleek black foil blister pack. The packaging bore only 2 words in bold silver lettering: Titan Surge. Inside the blister was a single, neon blue capsule. I wasn't born yesterday. I knew exactly what kind of illicit, gas station-style male enhancement stimulant this was. A sharp, degrading question drilled into my skull. What for? Why would my husband need this if he hadn't laid a finger on me in half a year? Who was he prepping for? The answer was as clear as daylight, bitter and cruel. Serena. Tonight, Declan was back on a night shift. Callum had already made an excuse about working late on a quarterly report. This pill was his preparation for a night of forbidden, carnal indulgence with his own brother's wife. They were going to turn this historic family estate where I and his mother slept into their personal brothel. A tsunami of rage and revulsion crashed over me. I wanted to kick the door down, hurl this blister pack at their faces, and torch this counterfeit family to the ground. But cold, hard logic slammed the brakes. If I did that, they would gaslight me. They would deny everything. Eleanor would fiercely protect her golden boy son and her stylish daughter-in-law. Ultimately, I would be painted as the hysterical, jealous wife. I refused to accept such a pathetic defeat. 6 years of my youth were not going to end in this humiliating disgrace. I clenched the blister pack until my knuckles turned white. A vicious, deranged plan ignited in my mind. I wouldn't expose them just yet. I would turn their instrument of pleasure into a weapon of their own gruesome destruction. I remembered something in the garage utility closet. An industrial-grade equine dewormer. My father had brought it from his farm in the Catskills last month for the large rescue mastiffs we kept on the property. My dad had explicitly warned me that the medication was incredibly potent. If a human ingested the wrong dosage, it could cause severe neurotoxicity, violent convulsions, foaming at the mouth, and an absolute meltdown of the nervous system. I was playing roulette with the Grim Reaper. I locked myself in my bedroom. My hands violently shook as I took a razor blade and carefully sliced open the Titan Surge capsule. I dumped the blue powder into a tissue and flushed it down the toilet. Next, I crushed a tablet of the livestock medication, scooped up the beige powder, and packed it tightly into the neon blue capsule. I meticulously resealed the foil with a dab of clear adhesive. I had birthed a monster, a pill masquerading as heavenly ecstasy, carrying the fires of purgatory. I slipped the compromised blister pack back into Callum's suit pocket, exactly as I had found it. Done. I collapsed onto my bed, drenched in a cold sweat. I was terrified, yet deep in my marrow, I felt the feral, intoxicating thrill of vengeance. Night fell. Dinner passed in a suffocating, awkward silence. After Declan kissed his wife goodbye and rushed out to his highway project, Callum immediately retreated to his office, throwing over his shoulder a command for me to go to sleep early. I lay in my freezing bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I was waiting. Waiting for the starting gun of my psychological warfare. Right at the stroke of midnight, I heard the faint click of Callum's office door. Then, the muffled sound of tiptoeing feet padding down the plush carpet toward Serena's wing of the house. Her door opened and clicked shut. My heart stopped beating. They had crossed the Rubicon. Time crawled with agonizing slowness. Suddenly, a feral, unearthly shriek shattered the dead silence of the Winnetka estate. The scream erupted from Serena's bedroom. Before my brain could even process the sound, another noise joined it, a guttural, agonizing roar of a wounded beast. Callum. Serena's piercing screams and Callum's animalistic roars hit the quiet house like a wrecking ball. I vaulted out of bed, my adrenaline spiking. My gamble had paid off. But the auditory horror of it was far worse than anything my dark imagination had conjured. Down the hall, Eleanor's heavy oak door flew open. She stumbled out into the corridor, her aged face drained of blood, her perfectly set blowout now a chaotic mess. What on earth? What is happening? Is it an intruder? She babbled, her eyes darting frantically in sheer terror. I didn't say a word. I merely pointed a trembling finger toward the room of sin. From behind the heavy mahogany door, the inhuman cacophony escalated. Serena's screams had devolved into breathless, hysterical sobbing. Help! Help me! Get off, you monster! Get away! Callum's roars grew louder, more deranged. There was a sickening series of dull thuds, like a heavy body violently launching itself against the drywall. Eleanor and I locked eyes. In both of our gazes was an unspeakable dread. Callum? Serena? What is wrong in there? Eleanor yelled, her authoritative voice cracking with panic. She staggered toward the door and violently twisted the brass knob, locked from the inside. Eleanor, please, help me, came Serena's pathetic, muffled whimper. Break it down! We have to break the door! Eleanor shrieked, losing her mind. She whipped her head toward me, her eyes wild. Ilara! Don't just stand there like a useless mannequin. Get a tool, get an axe. Operating like a programmed drone, I sprinted down to the garage and grabbed the heavy steel sledgehammer we kept near the snow shovels. When I returned, Eleanor was futilely ramming her fragile shoulder against the solid wood. I handed her the sledgehammer. In a state of absolute frenzy, she grabbed it, her eyes bloodshot, and began wildly smashing the deadbolt. Crack! Crack! The deafening splintering of wood echoed through the hall, but even that couldn't drown out the demonic sounds inside. After a dozen frantic swings, the lock obliterated. The door swung inward, and a gust of hot, stifling, foul-smelling air assaulted our faces. And then, we saw it. A tableau of absolute degradation that neither Eleanor nor I would ever be able to scrub from our retinas. This was no ordinary scene of infidelity. This was a living, breathing, Renaissance painting of hell on earth. The sprawling master suite was decimated, as if a Category 5 hurricane had touched down inside. Expensive Egyptian cotton sheets and down pillows were shredded across the hardwood. A heavy ceramic bedside lamp was shattered, shards of porcelain glittering like daggers on the rug, and in the center of the wreckage thrashed Callum. My sophisticated corporate executive husband was completely, horrifyingly naked. But that wasn't the worst part. His entire body was flushed a violent, toxic shade of purplish red, like a boiled lobster. His skin was ribbons of bleeding scratch marks, lacerations he was actively inflicting upon himself. Thick white foam bubbled over his lips, and his eyes were rolled so far back into his skull that only the whites showed. Every ounce of human sanity had evaporated. He convulsed violently on the floor, his fingernails tearing at his own flesh, guttural snarls ripping from his throat. He wasn't Callum anymore. He was a rabid, dying animal. Cowering in the far corner, trapped behind a mirrored vanity, was Serena. She was half-naked, her pricey hair extensions matted with sweat, her perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of absolute trauma. She hugged her trembling knees, staring with unhinged, dilated eyes at the monster writhing on her floor. Seeing the door open, she crawled toward us like a drowning victim grasping for a lifeboat. Her sobs were breathless, choked gasps. Eleanor. Alara. He's gone mad. Eleanor froze in the doorframe. Her pale complexion shifted to an ashen, translucent blue. Her lips quivered violently. She tried to form words, but her vocal cords paralyzed. She stared at her golden boy son, reduced to a rabid beast, and her favorite, stylish daughter-in-law in a state of sheer, undignified squalor. The collision of these two realities, a naked, disgusting truth, delivered a fatal blow to the psyche of a woman who had spent her entire life worshipping family prestige and social standing. She opened her mouth, her eyes bulged, and with a soft, pathetic wheeze, her eyes rolled back. She collapsed onto the floorboards like a sack of concrete, passing out cold. "Eleanor!" I screamed, instinctively dropping to my knees. But it was too late. She had passed out directly on the threshold of the room of sin. It all happened too fast, too violently. The sledgehammer blows, the screaming, the shattering porcelain, it had woken up the entire cul-de-sac. Through the open window, I could hear the agitated murmurs and fast-approaching footsteps of our wealthy neighbors. The facade of the Prescott family, the pristine, white picket fence illusion Eleanor had spent decades cultivating, was disintegrating into dust. I feigned panic, but beneath my theatrical gasps, an ice-cold current of absolute clarity anchored me. What's the next move? I couldn't let it end here. My game had just begun. I had to direct the narrative. I had to play the traumatized, clueless wife flawlessly. With violently shaking hands, I pulled out my iPhone and dialed 911. My voice fractured perfectly. I sobbed hysterically to the dispatcher. "Hello? 911? Please, you have to send an ambulance. Something horrific is happening at our house. My husband, he's having a seizure, or he's gone crazy. My mother-in-law passed out. Please, hurry." I choked out our Winnetka address. My performance had officially commenced, and tonight, I was going to rip down the velvet curtains hiding this family's rot with my bare hands. The wail of EMT sirens sliced through the serene night air of our upscale neighborhood. The strobing red and blue lights painted the faces of the nosy neighbors congregating at the bottom of our driveway. The wrought iron gates were wide open, The first arriving neighbors had pushed them apart. They stood there in their silk pajamas and Lululemon robes, whispering furiously, pointing up at the house. Every scandalized gasp, every pointed finger felt like 1,000 needles stabbing into the heart of the Prescott family's precious reputation. The paramedics rushed through the foyer with professional urgency, though even they couldn't entirely mask their shock at the carnage. I, fully immersed in the role of the hysterical wife, hovered around them with puffy eyes and a cracking voice, guiding them upstairs. "Up here, please. My husband. My mother-in-law. Please save them." I played it so flawlessly I almost believed my own grief. I grabbed a female paramedic's forearm, my fingers trembling. "I don't know what happened to him. He just went completely berserk. He's tearing his own skin off. And Eleanor, she just dropped from the shock." The paramedic patted my hand sympathetically. "Deep breaths, ma'am. We've got them." When they entered Serena's suite, the paramedics froze for a fraction of a second at the sheer grotesqueness of the scene, but their training kicked in. They split into two teams. Two massive EMTs tackled Callum. He was no longer convulsing as violently, but he was still snarling, his eyes vacant, his naked body thrashing. They had to hit him with a heavy dose of a chemical sedative just to strap him onto the gurney, throwing a thin thermal blanket over his exposed groin. The other medics checked Eleanor's vitals, blood pressure skyrocketing, pulse erratic, and swiftly loaded her onto a second stretcher. Serena was still huddled in the corner, sobbing silently. A female EMT approached her, draping one of my oversized Harvard hoodies over her exposed shoulders, and helped her stand. "Are you injured, miss? Do we need to examine you?" Serena just shook her head, her face a mask of catatonic apathy. She couldn't even make eye contact. Her usual haughty, Instagram-perfect arrogance was utterly obliterated, leaving behind nothing but the stench of humiliation. And then, the most spectacular, humiliating parade commenced. First, they wheeled Callum out the front doors. Bathed in the stark glare of the ambulance floodlights and the flash of neighbors' iPhone cameras, the dignified VP of sales was showcased in his most pathetic form. The thin thermal blanket did nothing to hide his bleeding, scratched torso. Crusty white foam dried on his chin, and his sedated eyes stared blankly at the sky. The whispers from the driveway escalated into loud, shocked gossip. "Oh my God, is that Callum Prescott? What is wrong with him? He looks like he's on bath salts. Why the hell was he in his brother's wife's room at 1 a.m? Next came Eleanor's stretcher. The esteemed former headmistress, who spent her retirement lecturing the country club wives on conservative family values and morality, lay immobilized, her face ghost white. The fact that she had collapsed right at the scene of the crime made the scandal exponentially juicier. Finally, escorted by a paramedic, emerged Serena. She drowned in my oversized hoodie. Her head bowed so low her chin touched her chest, her matted hair hiding her tear-streaked face. But everyone knew exactly who she was. The glamorous, high-maintenance sister-in-law was being marched out like a witch being led to the gallows. The neighborhood rumor mill shifted into overdrive. "Wait, isn't that Declan's wife? Why was she in the same room as Callum? Declan works the night shift on the I-90 project. Oh, that poor man. She was definitely sleeping with his brother. No wonder it looks like a murder scene in there." I stood on the grand stone steps, watching the 3 pillars of this prestigious family being loaded into the back of 3 separate ambulances under the scrutiny of the entire subdivision. I cried, bitter. Immensely satisfying tears streamed down my cheeks. My first net had been cast. Their honor, their reputation, the superficial things they valued more than human life, I had personally shredded them into confetti. But this was only the appetizer. The main course awaited at the hospital, where modern science would stamp a verified seal on their sins. I turned to a neighboring wife. "Susan, please lock the front door for me. I have to follow the ambulances." I climbed into the back of Callum's ambulance and huddled in the darkest corner. The vehicle tore off into the night, sirens blazing, leaving behind a neighborhood fully armed with a scandal that would dominate country club chatter for the next decade. I wiped my tears, the corners of my mouth twitching into a frigid phantom smile. Everything was executing flawlessly. The second net medical truth and their own desperate lies was about to be deployed, and I was the patient fisherman waiting for them to swim into the trap. The atmosphere in the emergency room was clinically suffocating. The sharp stench of medical-grade bleach assaulted my sinuses, mixed with the chaotic symphony of heart monitors and squeaking nurses' shoes. Callum was shoved into a high-security observation room. Eleanor was rushed to the cardiac ICU. Serena, after a brief triage confirming she had no physical injuries, sat huddled on a plastic corridor chair, still wrapped in the shock of the night. I, playing the sole sane, functioning relative, darted between billing counters and clipboards, deliberately showcasing my frantic distress to the entire nursing staff. They looked at me with deep pity. They had definitely heard the paramedics' colorful handover report. After 2 agonizing hours of waiting, a senior ER attending doctor approached me, his expression grave. "Are you the spouse of Callum Prescott?" "Yes, doctor. I'm his wife." "Please, tell me he's going to be okay," I pleaded, my voice trembling with Oscar-worthy anxiety. The doctor adjusted his glasses, his expression shifting to intense clinical urgency. "His vitals have stabilized after a heavy dose of Ativan and a gastric lavage. However, Mrs. Prescott, since your husband is currently sedated and incapacitated, you are acting as his medical proxy. I need to ask you a critical question to direct his treatment. Does your husband work in agriculture, or does he have access to veterinary supplies?" "Veterinary supplies?" "No, doctor. He's a corporate executive. We live in the suburbs." "Why?" I stuttered, my heart pounding in mock terror. "Because his toxicology screen just came back. He didn't just have a typical seizure. He is suffering from acute neurotoxic poisoning caused by massive concentrations of fenbendazole, a heavy-duty livestock dewormer used for horses or cattle. Another hour, and it would have been a fatal overdose. We need to know if this was accidental or intentional, as we are legally required to report poisonings of this nature to the authorities." Every word the doctor spoke sounded like a judge slamming a gavel. This was exactly what I needed. Irrefutable medical evidence. I slapped a hand over my mouth, tears brimming in my eyes. "Horse medicine? Oh my God. Doctor, this has to be a mistake." "It has to be," I sobbed, the portrait of a wife drowning in disbelief. The doctor sighed heavily, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We can only report what the lab finds, Mrs. Prescott. For now, we need to keep him under strict medical observation. You can go see your mother-in-law now. She just regained consciousness." I thanked him profusely and stumbled dramatically down the hall toward the ICU. I knew this toxicology report would reach Eleanor's ears instantly. I was practically vibrating with anticipation to see how the matriarch, who valued PR over morals, would attempt to spin this. As I predicted, when I entered the ICU bay, Eleanor was awake. She lay in the sterile bed, looking frail and gray, but the familiar, calculating, icy glint had already returned to her eyes. Serena sat beside her, sniffling, having just relayed the doctor's findings. Hearing my footsteps, Eleanor didn't show an ounce of shock or remorse. Instead, she glared at me with sheer venom, trying to incinerate me with her gaze. "You did this, didn't you?" she hissed, her voice a weak but vicious rasp. I recoiled, clutching my chest, feigning deeply offended shock. "Eleanor, what on earth are you talking about? I just spoke to the doctor. I am terrified. How could you even say that?" "Cut the act, Alara," Eleanor spat. "Who else in that house would poison my son with some filthy barnyard chemical?" Before I could respond, Serena interjected. Her tone was whiny and desperate, yet calculated. "Eleanor, wait. I was thinking, Callum has been so stressed. Maybe he was sleepwalking? What if he wandered into my room in a daze, and he accidentally drank something toxic while he was asleep?" I laughed internally. The narrative was so spectacularly stupid it bordered on comedy. But in the depths of their disgrace, it was the only pathetic life raft they had to cling to. Eleanor's eyes lit up as if Serena had just handed her a winning lottery ticket. Yes, exactly. Sleepwalking. My Callum used to sleepwalk when he was a teenager. The stress of his corporate merger must have triggered it. He must have wandered into the garage in his sleep and drank. Drank that liquid rat poison I bought last week? Animal medicine? Nonsense. The hospital lab made an error. She spoke with absolute conviction. gaslighting reality itself. She was desperately pivoting to a narrative that was far less scandalous. Sleepwalking and accidental rat poison ingestion was a tragic accident. Naked in a sister-in-law's bedroom high on horse tranquilizers was a societal death sentence. Serena immediately hitched a ride on the lie. Yes, exactly. I was dead asleep. Suddenly, the door opened. I thought Declan had gotten off his shift early, but it was Callum, and he just started convulsing and attacking the furniture. I was terrified. That's why I screamed. Serena began to wail, trying to paint herself as the innocent victim of a sleepwalking brother-in-law. A few hours later, Callum was wheeled out of the ER into a standard private room. He was conscious, though deeply groggy. When he was briefed by his mother and his mistress on the sleepwalking rat poison script, even in his sedated state, his corporate survival instincts kicked in. I don't remember a thing, he mumbled, rubbing his temples. My head is splitting. I must have been sleepwalking. That has to be it. The holy trinity of liars had united, weaving a pathetic tapestry of deceit to cover their vile tracks. They looked at me, eyes full of silent threats and desperate pleas commanding me to swallow their absurd story. They thought I was still naive, pliable little Alara. They were dead wrong. I looked at them, tears still tracking down my face, but my soul was an abyss of pure contempt. Sleepwalking? But, Eleanor, the doctor specifically said it was medicine for horses and cattle. We don't have rat poison, and we don't live on a farm. I asked the question with innocent, wide-eyed confusion, effectively dropping a grenade into the massive plot hole of their story. Eleanor's face twitched, but she was an old, cunning fox. Who knows? Maybe a rat dragged something over from the neighbor's landscaping chemicals. Enough! We are not blowing this out of proportion. We will tell the doctor he has a history of sleepwalking and drank pesticide. We will demand his discharge immediately. If the police get involved, it will be a media circus. It will ruin us. She delivered the final verdict with ironclad authority, leaving no room for debate. I fell silent, lowering my head, pretending to submit. But inside, a silent inferno was raging. Fine. If you want to play theater, I'll buy a front row ticket. But this play wasn't going to have the neat, tidy ending they were banking on. Because the true VIP audience member, the man with the absolute right to act as judge, jury, and executioner, was about to arrive. I couldn't wait to see their acting chops when faced with the raw, unfiltered fury of a husband who had just been cuckolded by his own flesh and blood. The hurricane I was waiting for made landfall faster than anticipated. Declan, having received a cryptic, panicked voicemail from me stating his entire family was in the ER, had abandoned his highway site and driven 90 miles an hour to the hospital. He burst through the double doors of the ward like a localized tornado. His usually kind, exhausted face was taut with sheer panic. Alara, what happened? Who's hurt? He grabbed my shoulders, panting heavily. I looked up at him with swollen red eyes and slowly shook my head. My voice was a fragile whisper. Declan, just go inside. Eleanor, Callum, and Serena, they're all in there. My fragmented, hesitant response was a slow-acting poison seeping into Declan's subconscious. He didn't ask another question. He shoved the door to Callum's private room open. Inside, the Prescotts were staging a heartwarming post-crisis family tableau. Eleanor was sitting in a wheelchair by the bed, while Serena spoon-fed Callum some hospital-grade Jell-O. Callum looked appropriately weak and remorseful. Seeing Declan, all three of them physically flinched. The air instantly thickened with radioactive awkwardness. Declan, what are you doing here at this hour? Eleanor stammered. Mom. Callum. Serena. What the hell is going on? Alara said there was an emergency. Why are you all here? Declan's eyes darted between them. His gaze snagged on Serena, who was awkwardly swimming in my Harvard hoodie. A tiny, insidious seed of suspicion planted itself in his pupils. Eleanor quickly launched into her rehearsed monologue. Oh, sweetheart, it's nothing major. Just a terrifying little accident. Last night, Callum's childhood sleepwalking flared up due to his work stress. He wandered into the kitchen asleep and accidentally drank some liquid pest control from the garage. Serena heard him choking, got terrified, and screamed. I fainted from the shock. Thank God the ambulance was fast. He's fine now. She delivered the lies flawlessly, her tone soothing and maternal. Declan furrowed his brow. Sleepwalking? Drinking rat poison? Mom, I've lived with Callum for 25 years. He has never sleepwalked a day in his life. He locked eyes with his older brother, who immediately looked down at his hospital blanket. Is that true, Callum? Callum nodded weakly, his voice a pathetic croak. I really don't remember. December. My brain is foggy. But I guess it must be. Callum's evasive hesitation only watered the seed of Declan's suspicion. He turned to his wife. Serena, look me in the eye and tell me exactly what happened. Serena's bottom lip quivered, and she summoned tears on command. She parroted Eleanor's script verbatim. I was fast asleep. Suddenly, Callum was just in the room. He was walking around in a trance, and then he just collapsed and started having a seizure. I was so scared. Declan! That's why I screamed. Despite their rehearsals, the script was riddled with bullet holes, and Declan was an engineer. His entire brain was wired for logic, structural integrity, and finding flaws. He wasn't going to buy a bridge made of toothpicks. Hold on, Declan interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. If Callum drank rat poison in the kitchen and had a seizure, why the hell were neither of you wearing clothes when the paramedics arrived? Declan's question was a sniper bullet right between the eyes. All the oxygen was instantly sucked out of the room. Eleanor, Callum, and Serena turned the color of chalk. Absolute, suffocating silence. That was my cue. I stepped into the room, knowing exactly how to turn the knife. I walked up to Declan, gently touching his arm, projecting the ultimate sympathetic sister-in-law. Declan, please, lower your voice. They've been through a massive trauma. Things got chaotic. Don't interrogate them like this. You'll give your mother another heart scare. My words were dressed as pacification, but they implicitly validated that their story made zero logical sense. I then turned to Serena, holding out a Lulu shopping bag I had brought from the house. Serena, I stopped by the house and packed you some of your own clothes. Go change into something comfortable. My hoodie is swallowing you whole. That was another precision strike. Why was his wife wearing my clothes? What state of undress were they in that required her to steal my sweatshirt while paramedics hauled his brother away? Seeing Declan standing there, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek, I decided to pour a gallon of gasoline onto the smoldering embers. I looked at Callum with wide, innocent eyes. Callum, honey, are you feeling better? It's just so weird. The ER doctor explicitly told me you overdosed on livestock dewormer for horses. But Eleanor says it was rat poison. I'm just so confused. Maybe the lab mixed up your blood with someone else's. Anyway, just rest. I hit the words livestock dewormer for horses with deliberate, heavy emphasis. The phrase violently jarred Declan. The absurdity peaked. Where would horse medication come from? And why would his brother consume it in Serena's bedroom in the middle of the night? Declan couldn't suppress it anymore. He snapped. He spun around, grabbed Serena by the shoulders and roared, "Tell me the goddamn truth! You were sleeping with him behind my back, weren't you? Why was he in your room at 1 a.m.? Why were you both naked? Answer me." Serena shrieked, cowering back. "No, Declan, you're paranoid. I didn't do anything." Seeing her perfect illusion shattering, Eleanor screeched from her wheelchair. "Declan Prescott, have you lost your damn mind? How dare you accuse your own brother? I told you it was a medical emergency. You don't trust your mother, your brother, or your own wife?" She tried to leverage her matriarchal guilt trip, but Declan wasn't a subservient teenager anymore. The toxic cocktail of betrayal and jealousy had mutated him. "Don't protect them, Mom. Nothing about this makes sense. And I swear to God, I am going to find out exactly what they were doing." I stood in the corner, fading into the wallpaper, watching the Prescott family nuclear reactor begin its meltdown. A cold smirk pulled at my lips. Everything was spiraling beautifully. I barely had to lift a finger, just plant a few logical breadcrumbs, drop a few innocent questions, and the inferno of Declan's jealousy did the heavy lifting. That fire wouldn't extinguish until it burned their entire facade to the ground. Now, It was time for me to return to the crime scene and retrieve the Holy Grail, the definitive proof that would serve as the kill shot in this war. While Declan raged in the hospital wing, I volunteered to go home to make some chicken noodle soup and grab toiletries. This was my golden window to secure my trophies. The Winnetka estate was eerily, beautifully silent. No condescending lectures from Eleanor, no arrogant sneers from Serena, no lying, cheating husband. I walked through my own house feeling like a cat burglar, but I was just reclaiming my agency. I walked straight past my bedroom and Callum's home office. My destination was the grand living room. Smack in the middle of it sat a massive, custom restoration hardware leather sectional, the crown jewel of Eleanor's interior design, the throne from which she judged my every move. But she had no idea that on her sacred, pristine altar of family dignity, the most repulsive, filthy acts were being committed. About a month ago, when Callum's coldness and Serena's brazen flirting reached a tipping point, my anxiety demanded action. I couldn't survive on gut feelings and paranoia. I needed hard evidence. So, I ordered a high-tech nanny cam off Amazon, disguised perfectly as a sleek, modern smoke detector. I lied and said the old one was beeping, and I replaced the one mounted directly above the custom built-in bookshelves. It had a sweeping, 4K bird's-eye view of the entire living room and that leather sectional. I had reviewed the SD card every few days, but only caught mundane footage. I was starting to think I was genuinely losing my mind. But a woman's intuition never lies. I dragged a dining chair over, climbed up, and with a pounding heart, unclipped the fake smoke detector. I was terrified of confronting the visual reality of my nightmare, but I needed the ammunition. I locked myself in my bedroom, plugged the microSD card into my MacBook, and pulled up the encrypted files. Dozens of video thumbnails appeared, sorted by date. I scrolled past the recent ones. Then, I found it. 2 weeks ago, a Saturday. I remembered that day perfectly. I had driven Eleanor to an antique auction in the city, and Declan had been called away on an emergency bridge inspection in Springfield. Callum had claimed he had back-to-back Zoom calls, and Serena said she had a migraine. What a beautifully orchestrated coincidence. With a trembling index finger, I double-clicked the file. The screen flickered to life. Initially, just an empty, sunlit living room. 10 minutes in, Serena strolled into the frame. She was wearing a sheer, crimson-red La Perla silk slip that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. She grabbed a Topo Chico from the wet bar, sat on the restoration hardware sofa, and draped herself across it like a centerfold. Moments later, Callum emerged from the hallway. Seeing her, his posture shifted, predatory and primal. He didn't say a word. He just closed the distance, grabbed her, and pulled her into him. And then, right there on my laptop screen, a nightmare materialized in ultra-high definition. They tore into each other like feral animals starved for meat. The frantic kissing, the groping, the graphic moans, and the filthy, degrading dirty talk pouring out of my highly educated, refined husband's mouth echoed from my laptop speakers. They possessed zero shame, zero hesitation. They were defiling the exact sofa where we hosted Thanksgiving, the room Eleanor proudly called the heart of our family's heritage. Tears spilled over my eyelashes, but they weren't born of heartbreak. They were acidic tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I stared at the man on the screen. Was that Callum? The man I vowed to love in sickness and in health? No, that was an imposter. A parasite wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. And Serena? Not a sister-in-law. A venomous snake I had welcomed into my home. Jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I forced myself to watch the entire 45-minute video. I didn't skip a second. I wanted every thrust, every moan branded onto my cerebral cortex so I would never, ever feel an ounce of pity for them. When it ended, my hands were steady. I copied the MP4 file onto an encrypted USB flash drive, then backed it up to 3 separate secure cloud servers. Done. I wiped the SD card clean and reinstalled the fake smoke detector. No trace left behind. I had the nuclear codes in my pocket. The moment I detonated this, the lives of those 2 sociopaths would be vaporized. Callum's corporate prestige, Serena's faux innocence, Eleanor's puritanical high society standing, it would all burn. But I wasn't going to press the button just yet. A sex tape proved moral bankruptcy. I wanted more. I wanted them decimated financially. I wanted them ruined, destitute, and begging for scraps. I wanted to expose not just their lust, but the deep-rooted, parasitic greed of this family. And I knew exactly where to dig for the financial bodies. Hatred is a powerful alchemist. It had transmuted Alara, the naive country girl, into a cold, calculating apex predator. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight into Callum's home office, the sanctuary I was explicitly forbidden to enter. Today, the rules were dead. The room was aggressively masculine mahogany desk, Eames chair, shelves lined with Harvard Business Review journals and economics textbooks. The perfect camouflage for a morally bankrupt thief. I sat in his chair and woke up his MacBook Pro. His arrogance was his downfall. He never bothered with a password at home. I pulled up Google Chrome. The history was clean Wall Street Journal. Stock tickers. He was smart enough to clear his tracks there, but that's not what I was hunting for. I opened the Chase Bank portal. We had a joint high-yield savings account where we pooled money for our future. I had funneled 6 years of my salary as a senior accountant into that account, alongside Callum's bonuses. It was supposed to be the down payment for our summer lake house. It was my blood, sweat, and future. The dashboard loaded, and the number staring back at me felt like a physical punch to the trachea. Available balance, $45.62. Over $150,000. Gone. Vaporized. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from sliding out of the chair. My fingers clicked on the transaction history, and the brutal, unforgiving truth laid itself bare on the ledger. Starting exactly 6 months ago, the exact timeline his corporate merger started, and his affection died, the account hemorrhaged cash. Regular Zelle transfers of $5,000 and $10,000. The recipient? Worse, there were massive wire transfers. A $20,000 down payment to a Land Rover dealership in Beverly Hills. A $15,000 charge to Cartier. I had a flashback to Serena pulling up in her brand new Range Rover Velar, bragging that Declan had surprised her. I remembered the diamond Panther necklace she wore to the country club gala, gushing over her husband's generosity. It was all a grotesque lie. Declan, breaking his back on night shifts, couldn't afford that lifestyle. The sugar daddy bankrolling this spoiled, adulterous brat was my husband. Callum had systematically drained my life savings, my hard-earned money, to finance his mistress. He stole from his wife to buy luxury cars for his brother's wife. The betrayal transcended physical infidelity. It was a calculated, financial assassination. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had robbed me blind and treated me like an absolute imbecile. My mind was no longer a storm. It was a sub-zero glacier. Absolute, crystalline ice. Any residual affection, any microscopic thread of loyalty I held for this man snapped. I didn't shed a single tear. Tears were a luxury for victims, and I was no longer a victim. I pulled out my phone and meticulously photographed every single bank statement, every wire transfer, every Cartier receipt. I saved them all to the same USB drive containing the sex tape. 2 weapons of mass destruction. One for the court of public opinion, one for the court of law. But I didn't stop there. I scoured his documents folder and found a PDF titled Business Plan Q3. It wasn't a corporate sales strategy. It was a meticulously drafted proposal to leverage the equity of our Winnetka estate to secure a commercial loan. The purpose? To open a high-end Pilates studio and athleisure boutique in downtown Chicago. The proposed managing director? Serena Prescott. He was building an empire for them, mortgaged against my home and Declan's sanity. I snapped the laptop shut. A ghostly, venomous smile crept onto my face. Thank you, Callum. Thank you for showing me exactly what you are. You're not just an adulterer. You're an embezzler. You're a thief. I stood up, wiped my fingerprints from his desk, and cleared my browser history. I went to the kitchen, poured 2 cans of Campbell's soup into a thermos, and calmly drove my Audi back to the hospital. I knew what awaited me upon my return. A masterclass in gaslighting. A family summit of hypocrites where the predators would play the victims, and I, the actual victim, was expected to play the docile, compliant fool. Fine, I'll play the fool. I would play it all the way to the grand finale. When I walked back into the hospital ward, thermos in hand, the dynamic had shifted. Callum was being discharged. The attending physician stated he was metabolically stable, though he required bed rest. I knew the truth. Eleanor had undoubtedly leveraged her elite connections and the hospital board to fast-track her son's release to contain the PR nightmare. We returned to the Winnetka estate. The house felt like a mausoleum. Eleanor took her rightful place on the Restoration Hardware sofa, the very sofa from the video. She still looked haggard from her fainting spell, but her tyrannical aura had returned in full force. Callum sat rigidly beside her, staring at the floor rug, avoiding eye contact with the room. Serena, having changed into the conservative jeans and sweater I brought her, was curled up in a side chair, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Declan sat on the opposite love seat, his posture stiff, his face an impenetrable mask of fury and exhaustion. He had stayed with them the entire time I was gone, and it was obvious their explanations hadn't pacified him. Seeing me enter, Eleanor cleared her throat, commanding the room. "Ilara, you're back. Put the soup down and take a seat. We are having a family meeting." Her tone was chillingly normal, as if her son hadn't been screaming naked on the floor just hours prior. I obediently sat next to Declan, directly across from my husband and his mistress. The Council of Lies officially convened. Eleanor initiated the propaganda. "I know last night was deeply traumatic for all of us. But as they say, we wash our dirty laundry inside the house. This incident does not leave these walls. The Prescott family name and our standing in the community depend on absolute discretion." She paused, leveling a hard stare at Declan, identifying him as the primary threat. "I have spoken extensively with Callum and Serena. This whole nightmare was a tragic, catastrophic misunderstanding. Callum has been working 100-hour weeks. The exhaustion triggered his latent sleepwalking. He wandered out of his office, completely unconscious, and stumbled into Serena's room. She didn't miss a beat. He was severely dehydrated in his sleep state. He saw a glass of water on Serena's nightstand and drank it. What he didn't know was that Serena had dissolved a heavy dose of her prescription sleep aids into that water. The interaction of the drugs caused a paradoxical reaction, a psychotic break. That is why he was acting so erratic. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from bursting into hysterical laughter. The scriptwriters had been busy. This new draft was significantly more medical than the rat poison angle. She was brilliant at pivoting, but she didn't realize that the more intricate the lie, the easier it is to unravel. As for the state of their clothing, Eleanor pressed on, her voice tightening. When Callum began convulsing, he was thrashing violently. Serena panicked and tried to restrain him so he wouldn't crack his head open. In the struggle, their clothes were torn and disheveled. That is the entirety of it. Nothing indecent occurred, period. She waved a hand, cueing her actors. Callum slowly looked up, aiming a pathetic, puppy dog gaze at his brother. December. I am so sorry. I swear to God, I wasn't in my right mind. I'm so sorry I put you and Serena through that trauma. There is absolutely nothing going on between us. Serena triggered the waterworks, sliding off her chair and kneeling on the Moroccan rug in front of Declan. Declan, please, you have to believe me. I was terrified. I would never, ever betray you. If I'm lying, may God strike me dead right now. She sobbed with such theatrical devastation that a lesser man would have crumbled on the spot. But Declan wasn't buying the soap opera. He stared down at his weeping wife, then across at his cowardly brother. The silence stretched until the tension threatened to shatter the windows. Is that right? Declan's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Serena, since when do you have insomnia? Since when do you take prescription sleep aids? We've been married for 4 years. I've never seen you take so much as a melatonin. Serena choked on a sob, her eyes darting nervously. It just started a few weeks ago. You've been so stressed with the highway project, I didn't want to burden you with my problems. Oh, how thoughtful of you, Declan sneered, the sarcasm dripping like acid. And how do you explain the ER doctor? He specifically told Ilara that Callum overdosed on veterinary livestock medication, not Ambien. How do you spin that one? Eleanor intervened like a bulldog. The hospital lab is incompetent. They cross-contaminated his blood work. I am having our private family physician review the charts tomorrow. Do not put your faith in overworked ER staff, Declan. Bullshit, Declan roared, surging to his feet. Mom, do you think I'm a moron? A major trauma center doesn't mistake Ambien for horse dewormer. This entire story is a fabricated load of crap. Eleanor's face flushed purple. Seeing logic fail, she resorted to emotional blackmail. Declan Prescott, he is your flesh and blood. Are you seriously going to destroy his life over a paranoid delusion? If this gets out, he will be fired. His career, his marriage, this family's legacy annihilated. I am begging you. For the sake of this family, let this go. I am drawing a line in the sand. This conversation is over. We move forward. She slammed down the ultimate trump card. Maternal guilt. I sat utterly still, watching the psychological warfare. I saw the violent conflict tearing Declan apart. He was vibrating with rage and suspicion, but he was heavily conditioned by decades of loyalty, brotherhood, and Eleanor's iron-fisted rule. He was trapped. I knew it was my cue to step onto the stage, not to drop the bomb, but to defuse the room, preserving the battlefield for my grand finale. I stood up, walked over to Declan, and gently placed a hand on his tense back. Declan, I think Eleanor is right. Everyone in the room froze, staring at me in shock. I put on my best, most pathetic smile. A bad peace is better than a good war. Callum has apologized. He was sick. We have to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, family is everything, right? The room was stunned into silence. I'm sure they couldn't fathom that I, the supposedly scorned wife, would deliver such a merciful pardon. Declan looked at me with a profound, heartbreaking complexity in his eyes. Eleanor, Callum, and Serena looked at me, their initial shock melting into smug, arrogant relief. They thought I had surrendered. They thought my desperate love for my husband and my inherent weakness had forced me to swallow their lies. I held back a sociopathic grin. Fools, every single one of you. I wasn't being merciful. I was just giving them a brief recess to enjoy their counterfeit peace, because the higher they climbed up the ladder of false security, the more bones they would break when I kicked it out from under them. I needed a bigger venue. I needed maximum collateral damage. And the perfect venue was only a week away. Eleanor's 65th birthday gala, the day the entire extended family, country club elites, and local politicians would gather in this very room. That would be my judgment day. For the next 7 days, a grotesque, artificial harmony suffocated the Winnetka estate. Everyone walked on eggshells, pretending the apocalypse hadn't almost arrived. Eleanor stopped making passive-aggressive remarks about my outfits. Serena dodged me in the hallways, scurrying away like a cockroach under a flashlight. Callum overcompensated violently. He bought me a Cartier watch, brought me roses, and showered me with sickly sweet apologies for scaring me with his medical episode. He truly believed I was the same docile, manipulatable doormat he had married. I accepted his gifts with a soft, vacant smile, while mentally calculating how much they would add to my divorce settlement. Declan remained a ghost. He was sullen, monosyllabic, and rarely came home. He stopped asking questions, but I knew the inferno in his gut hadn't burned out. It was just waiting for a breeze. I was about to become a hurricane. Eleanor's 65th birthday was the social event of her calendar. It was her opportunity to flex her matriarchal muscle, to parade her 2 successful sons and her compliant daughters-in-law in front of the Chicago elite. This year was no different. Eleanor delegated the party prep to Serena and me. She pulled me aside, sipping her Chardonnay. Alara, darling, do me a favor. Put together a little video montage. Family photos, vacations, the boys growing up. We'll play it on the big screen in the living room after the toast. It will be a lovely tribute. She had no idea she had just handed the executioner an axe. Of course, Eleanor. I'll make sure it's unforgettable. I smiled brightly. I spent 2 entire days locked in the home office. But I wasn't arranging baby photos. I was deep in Adobe Premiere Pro, editing my magnum opus. I seamlessly spliced the 4-5-minute sex tape of Callum and Serena with the screenshots of the drained joint bank accounts and the Cartier receipts. I added bold, cinematic text overlays. A gift from Callum to his sister-in-law. Secret escapades. Dissipation of marital assets. For the grand finale, I juxtaposed a high-res image of the Titan Surge blister pack right next to a photo of the equine livestock dewormer. A slow fade text appeared on the screen. The true price of betrayal. I had forged a masterpiece of vengeance. A digital IED. Saturday arrived. The house was packed to the gills with 50 guests, uncles, aunts, cousins, board members, and country club socialites. Champagne flowed. Laughter bounced off the vaulted ceilings. No one had a clue they were standing at ground zero. The catered dinner was a hit. After the clinking of glasses and Eleanor's self-indulgent speech about the sanctity of family, it was my time. I stood up, grabbed the microphone, and looked out over the sea of wealthy, oblivious faces. I let my voice tremble just a little for dramatic effect. Honored guests, family, tonight is incredibly special. To honor Eleanor, I've put together a short video presentation, a look at the true core of this family, capturing moments that show exactly who the Prescotts really are behind closed doors. The crowd erupted in warm applause. Eleanor, sitting at the head of the dining table, beamed at me with aristocratic pride. Callum and Serena sat near her, sipping their Veuve Clicquot, utterly clueless. I plugged my USB drive into the massive 8.5-inch OLED TV mounted above the fireplace. I hit play and calmly set the remote down. The screen flared bright. But instead of a nostalgic slide of Callum in a Little League uniform, the screen displayed the Restoration Hardware sofa. And there were Callum and Serena, tearing each other's clothes off. The lively chatter of 50 people died instantly. The silence was absolute, a vacuum of shock. Eyes widened to the size of saucers. A crystal champagne flute slipped from an aunt's hand, shattering against the hardwood floor with a deafening crash. Eleanor's jaw unhinged. Her face turned the color of wet cement. What? What is this? Turn it off! Elara, turn it off right now! She shrieked, panic ripping her vocal cords. Callum sat frozen for 2 seconds before his brain registered the horror. He scrambled over his chair, practically diving toward the television to rip the power cord out of the wall. But I had hidden the cables behind the custom molding. He couldn't find it. The video kept playing. The high-definition groans, the explicit touching, the vile, adulterous dialogue echoed through the speakers, bouncing off the faces of the conservative prep school elite. The paralysis broke, replaced by utter pandemonium. Gasps, shrieks, and furious whispers ignited. Oh my God! Is that Serena? With Callum? But they're in-laws. This is disgusting. I feel sick. Just as Callum desperately tried to smash the screen with a decorative vase, the video transitioned. Up popped the Chase Bank statements. The red highlighted withdrawals. The Cartier receipts. The text overlay. Over $150,000 stolen from a joint marital account to fund an affair. The crowd gasped a second time. It wasn't just incestuous adultery, it was financial fraud. The bomb had successfully leveled the building. The Prescott family was eradicated. Eleanor sat paralyzed, her hands trembling violently in her lap, unable to form a coherent sentence. Callum and Serena stood exposed in the center of the room, pelted by the disgusted, horrified stares of their entire social circle. I stood quietly in the corner, leaning against a pillar. I felt no euphoric joy. I felt a hollow, cold finality. The rot had been excised, and then the real lightning struck. Declan, who had been sitting at the far end of the table, his knuckles white around his butter knife, finally snapped. The pressure cooker exploded. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply stood up, walked with terrifying calmness toward his older brother, and unleashed hell. Crack. Declan's fist connected with Callum's jaw with a sickening crunch of bone. Callum was lifted off his feet, crashing backward directly onto the catered buffet table. The wooden table splintered in half. Silver chafing dishes, filet mignon, and red wine exploded everywhere. The elegant dining room mutated into a gladiator arena. Callum grabbed his face, blood gushing from his shattered nose. But Declan didn't give him a second to recover. He mounted his brother like a rabid dog, grabbing him by his tailored collar, his fist raining down like a jackhammer. You piece of shit! She's my wife! In my house! I'll kill you! I will end you! Declan roared, the veins in his neck bulging. The quiet, exhausted engineer was gone, replaced by an apex predator out for blood. Callum, softer from years behind a corporate desk, could only shield his face and sob. "Deck, stop, please, it was her. She came onto me, I swear to God." Even as he was getting beaten to a pulp, he threw his mistress straight under the bus. Hearing her name, Serena, who was hyperventilating in the corner, dropped to her knees. She crawled through the spilled wine and broken glass toward Declan, grabbing his pant leg. "Declan, baby, no! It's a lie. He forced me. I didn't want to. Please forgive me." She tried to play the victim one last time, begging for a drop of mercy. Declan kicked his leg free, sending her sprawling onto the floor. He looked at her with a disgust so profound it transcended hatred. "Don't touch me, you filthy whore. You deserve each other." The physical brawl escalated. Uncles and male guests finally recovered from their shock and rushed in, desperately trying to pry Declan off Callum's bloody face. Women were screaming, dialing their drivers to get out of the house. The pristine, elite Prescott Gala had devolved into a Jerry Springer episode. Eleanor remained bolted to her chair at the head of the table. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't commanding the room. She just stared with dead, vacant eyes as her two sons violently destroyed each other amidst the wreckage of her catered dinner. The family values, the country club prestige, the untouchable status she worshipped her entire life had been publicly butchered by me, the country bumpkin daughter-in-law she despised, and she couldn't say a single word to spin it. Amidst the chaos, nobody noticed me. I was the architect of this destruction, quietly observing my masterpiece. Declan getting his physical revenge was satisfying, but it wasn't the final act. I needed one more tumor removed to sever the very last emotional tie holding this family together, and the universe handed it to me on a silver platter. Serena, desperate, cornered, and bleeding socially to death, realized no one was going to save her. In a hysterical bid to distribute the blame, she screamed a phrase that effectively executed her mother-in-law. "It's not just my fault." Eleanor knew. She knew the whole time. The screaming in the room stopped. Even Declan froze, his fist suspended in the air above Callum's face. He slowly turned his head to look at his weeping wife, then to his mother. Serena, like a trapped rat, went for the jugular. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Eleanor. "Don't look at me like I'm crazy. Eleanor, tell them. The vintage Chanel bag I gave you for Mother's Day? The Cartier pearl earrings you're wearing right now? Where do you think the money came from? I told you Callum was taking care of me, and you smiled. You told me to keep him happy so the money kept flowing. Tell them." Every syllable out of Serena's mouth was a nail in Eleanor's coffin. Eleanor's face went ghastly white. She opened her mouth like a suffocating fish, but no denial came out. The ultimate truth was laid bare. Eleanor, the moral crusader of Winnetka, knew about the incestuous affair, but because her vanity was stroked with luxury goods paid for with my stolen savings, she turned a blind eye. She acted as the silent pimp for her own son, sacrificing me on the altar of her greed. Declan stood up, leaving Callum bleeding on the floor. He stared at his mother. The raw rage in his eyes faded, replaced by an abyss of absolute, crushing heartbreak. His wife was a whore, his brother was a traitor, and his mother was a monster who sanctioned it all for a designer handbag. "You knew?" Declan whispered, his voice cracking. "You let this happen in our house?" He backed away from the table, looking at the three of them as if they were covered in infectious disease. He didn't yell. He just turned his back on them. I looked at Eleanor. The puzzle was complete. I finally understood why she hated me and protected Serena. I was just a blue-collar accountant who brought in an honest paycheck. Serena was the golden goose, dropping luxury bribes into her lap, and Eleanor didn't care that the gold was covered in filth. The wealthy guests stared at Eleanor with abject revulsion. The whispers started again. Selling out her own family for handbags. What a despicable woman. Trash. Stripped of her armor, exposed in front of her peers, Eleanor's body gave out. She clutched her chest, her breathing turning into ragged, wet gasps. "Air. I need. Help me," she wheezed, slumping sideways in her chair. Not a single person moved. The guests, her own sons, her daughter-in-law, everyone just watched her with cold apathy. I watched her without a single drop of pity. You reap what you sow, Eleanor. The curtain was closing. It was time for my exit. I walked calmly to the center of the ruined dining room, stepping over a broken plate of hors d'oeuvres. I approached Callum, who was sitting up against the wall, clutching his broken nose, blood soaking his Oxford shirt. I reached into my Prada tote bag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and dropped it directly onto his lap. "Sign them," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scythe. "We are done." It was a petition for the dissolution of marriage, and it was just the opening salvo of my legal war. Callum looked down at the bold legal header, his bloodshot eyes widening in terror. Perhaps a microscopic part of his narcissistic brain still believed I would stay to protect my lifestyle. He severely underestimated the absolute zero temperature of a woman pushed to the edge. "Elara." "No. Please," he mumbled through a mouthful of blood, reaching out with a trembling hand to grab my ankle. "I messed up. I'm so sorry. Please, give me a chance to fix this." I looked down at him and let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Did you give me a chance when you shut me out of our bedroom? Did you give me a chance when you were screwing her on the living room sofa? Did you give me a chance when you stole my life savings to buy her jewelry? You burned the house down, Callum. I'm just locking the doors so you can't get out." I kicked my ankle free from his grip. I turned to the remaining stunned guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption to your evening, but cancer has to be surgically removed before it kills the host. My name is Elara, and as of tonight, I am officially resigning from the Prescott family." Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out the grand front doors. I didn't look back at Callum's sobbing, Eleanor's gasping, or the absolute carnage I left in my wake. The psychological war was over. The legal war was about to begin, and I was armed to the teeth. The very next morning, I sat in my ruthless divorce attorney's office in downtown Chicago. I wasn't just filing for a no-fault divorce. My lawyer filed an emergency ex parte motion to freeze all of Callum's financial assets, including the house, his 401k, and his stock portfolios. Then, we filed a massive claim for dissipation of marital assets. In the state of Illinois, if a spouse wastes marital funds on an affair, the court will force them to pay it back from their share of the estate. And I had the receipts. I had the video. I had the business plan for Serena's boutique. It was a slam dunk. When Callum was served by the county sheriff, he broke. He blew up my phone with voicemails, oscillating between pathetic begging and desperate threats. I blocked his number. Even Eleanor, recovering from what turned out to be a mild cardiac event, had the audacity to call me from the hospital. "Elara, aren't you going too far? He's still your husband. You're trying to leave him with nothing. Be reasonable." I spoke into the receiver with icy calm. "First, I'm taking exactly what he stole from me. Second, he left himself with nothing. And third, Eleanor, I'd focus on your blood pressure. If you keep bothering me, I might just leak the Cartier receipts and your complicity to the country club's newsletter." She hung up instantly. The divorce proceedings were a massacre. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable, humiliating evidence, Callum's lawyer advised him to settle or face total annihilation in open court. He sat across the mediation table looking like a ghost of the arrogant VP he used to be. The judge signed the decree. I was awarded the divorce. The Winnetka estate was ordered to be sold, and because of the dissipation claim, I was awarded 75% of the equity. Callum was legally ordered to reimburse me the $150,000 he stole, effectively wiping out his entire liquid net worth and putting him massively in debt to his own lawyers. When we walked out of the Daly Center courthouse, Callum had nothing. No wife, no family, no reputation, and an empty bank account. He literally fell to his knees on the plaza concrete, trying to grab my coat. I stepped around him like he was dog waste on the sidewalk and got into my Uber. Epilogue. After my total victory, the shockwaves decimated the rest of the Prescott parasites. Serena was the first to fall. The night of the party, Declan packed a duffel bag and left the estate. He didn't file for divorce immediately. He wanted her to sweat. He froze their joint accounts, canceled her credit cards, and blocked her number. Serena, a woman whose entire personality was funded by other people's money, suddenly found herself destitute. When the court ordered the Winnetka house to be sold, Serena realized she was about to be homeless. She desperately tried to ambush Declan at his job site, but he had security escort her away. On the day the house closed, Declan finally surfaced. He showed up with his attorney to hand her the eviction notice and a brutal ultimatum. While Illinois law doesn't explicitly factor infidelity into alimony, the threat of being publicly deposed in our financial fraud lawsuit was all the leverage he needed. Armed with my video, Declan gave her a choice. Sign a pre-drafted settlement waiving every single dime of alimony right then and there, or face a devastating civil suit. Cornered, she signed it on the hood of his truck. She screamed and cried on the driveway. Serena was evicted that night with 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases and nowhere to go. Her own parents, humiliated by the viral country club gossip, refused to take her in. Last I heard, the glamorous Beverly Hills wannabe was renting a cheap studio apartment in a bleak suburb, working shifts at a fast fashion mall kiosk. Her youth and beauty, her only currency, were rapidly fading under the stress of actual poverty. Callum's fate was equally poetic. The gossip from the gala inevitably leaked to the C-suite at his corporation. A VP involved in incestuous adultery, financial fraud, and a violent brawl is a walking liability. He was quietly but swiftly terminated. With a ruined reputation in the industry, nobody would touch his resume. Broke, buried in legal, he took a job doing back-office data entry just to pay off the debt he owed me. And Eleanor, the mastermind of complicity, paid the heaviest toll. The stress of losing her social standing, her home, and her son's futures triggered a massive, debilitating stroke. She survived, but the right side of her body was permanently paralyzed, and her speech was severely slurred. Because Callum was broke and Declan washed his hands of the family, there was no money for premium at-home care. They were forced to place Eleanor in a dismal, state-funded Medicaid nursing facility on the outskirts of the city. Declan never visited her. He told his cousins, "My mother died the night she chose a handbag over her son's." Eleanor spends her days trapped in a cheap wheelchair, staring at a linoleum wall, surrounded by strangers. The society friends she desperately tried to impress never call. The prestige she sacrificed her soul for is gone. In her confused, slurred mumblings, the nurses say she constantly calls out my name, Ilara. Perhaps in the depths of her stroke-addled brain, she realizes the daughter-in-law she tortured was the only one who ever genuinely cared for her. But the gates of forgiveness have been welded shut. I heard these updates through the grapevine, and my heart remained perfectly still. I felt no joy, but I felt no pity. Karma is a remarkably precise accountant. She always balances the ledger eventually. As for me, I took my massive divorce settlement and bought a stunning, sun-drenched loft in the West Loop of Chicago. I moved my parents out from the Catskills into a beautiful condo nearby, ensuring they could retire in absolute comfort. I didn't go back to corporate accounting. I used my capital to launch my own boutique financial consulting firm, specializing in helping women-owned small businesses protect their assets. The firm is thriving. I found a passion and an aggressive drive I never knew I possessed. I am not rushing into the dating pool. The scars of betrayal are deep, but they are no longer bleeding. I know that one day, I'll find a partner who brings peace to my life, not chaos. But until then, I am fiercely, unapologetically in love with my own independence. This afternoon, standing on the balcony of my penthouse, sipping coffee and listening to the hum of the L train, I smiled. I used to be a caged bird, desperate for the approval of my captors, but the fire didn't burn me. It forged me. The storm is over, and the sky above Chicago is nothing but clear, brilliant blue.